Welcome to Fieldsports Britain, and aren't we just surrounded by mellow fruitfulness at this time of year, and horses? The autumn hunting season is well underway, the pheasants are just around the corner. Coming up, we've got pigeons not with shotguns, but with an air gun. We've got galloons of gun dogs at the Midland Game Fair. And we've got top pheasant shot Mike Yardley in Devon teaching us how to shoot them straighter. But first, our colleague Abbey Burton is in Delhi shooting for her country at the Commonwealth Games. We caught up with her just before she left. Commonwealth Games, how did that come about?
Well, it was in July that I found out, obviously because it was a series of the first 3 selection shoots this year, in which you had to qualify the top 2 ladies in England with a score of 69 out of 75, and I managed to get mine at the first, so...
Fantastic, well done you. So when are you off?
I'm off on the 29th of September, and we compete the second week in October, and we're staying out there, returning home on the 15th, so we get to see a little bit of something else as opposed to...
And for those who don't know where it is, where is it?
It's in Delhi, in India.
India?
India, yes.
Marvellous. Now, are you going to get funded to do all this?
Yeah, England are going to be funding the teams to go. There'll be a village out there, so there'll be food catering for everybody. Which is sometimes promising when you go overseas, because some foods you have to avoid and some are okay.
Delhi belly.
Yes, yeah, I definitely don't want that.
You don't want that, but you do want to go. You must have been pretty happy.
Yeah, very happy, very over the moon. It'd be my first Commonwealth Games. I had to sit at home watching Edward Ling go to Melbourne in 2006, so now it's my turn.
Now, Edward is your boyfriend. Is he going to go to India?
No, he's not going to India, but he will be aiming for London 2012.
So he is going to sit at home and watch you this time, and you're both, with any luck, going to coincide in London 2012.
That's right, yes.
That'll be a very, very good one to look out for. But Abbey, well done.
Thank you.
So, pack up your decoys, pack up your hide netting, but don't bring your shotgun, just bring an air rifle. Here's how the Purists shoot pigeons. It's September and we are in Kent, the Garden of England, with Frank Underdown, who is hiding out by the small fields of stubble among the apple orchards, hoping to pop at a pigeon or two. But that's not a shotgun, it's an air rifle.
I prefer air rifle shooting to 12 bore because of the noise and the disturbance, and with a nice air rifle with a silencer on, no one knows you're there, except the pigeons.
With such small fields, the decoys can be set up on the stubble within easy range of the hide.
I like to have dead birds for decoys. I do have flock decoys, but the pigeons come in, and it's better if you've got dead birds. It gives you that little bit more chance, because the pigeon will land between your decoys and he'll look round, and if something's not right, he's off. So what I like to do is when they're coming in, I like to get them in the scope, and as soon as they land, pull the trigger. Time to really take aim and hit them behind the ear. I like to hit the pigeon in the shoulder, and then I've got a chance of going right through his vital organs. And because I like to kill the pigeons straight away if I can. You can't always do it, but you know, if you can kill them straight out, it's so much the better.
Frank likes to build the hide well into the hedge.
I like to be flush with the hedge so that the hide doesn't stick out. You know, if you've got a nice hide, and I've got hides where I can put them up, and I've got what I call a letterbox cut in the hide, which I just poke my rifle through.
It's all about a steady shot. He also likes to incorporate a rifle rest into the hide.
Yeah, I'm 78 years old, so my hand's not as steady as it should be, but I like to have something to rest on. Yeah.
Not all of the pigeons are behaving. Some are flying over but not settling on the stubble, preferring instead to land on the apple trees on the other side of the field and look out for danger. It all puts the pressure on Frank to stay extra still.
The orchards are handy. The pigeons like to roost on the trees and the posts, but you know, there's stubble and hedges all round, so it's a nice little spot.
Time to pick up the birds and the decoys and move on to another location. Frank knows this countryside well and has the shooting over much of it. It's a short drive to another of his favourite spots where he hopes for more success. The pigeons are certainly here, but will they land among the decoys this time? Frank decides to deploy the whirly.
Sometimes it brings them in and sometimes it frightens them. It's all right for shotgun shooting, the whirly, the pigeon magnet, but with the air rifle you've got to get them to land.
But then he's not happy with the whirly and opts for a flapper instead.
And then later on I put the flapper up with a timer on it, and that seemed to bring them in. And then they stopped coming in, so I went out, moved the decoys about a little bit, and then they come again. It's one of these things you've got to try and do. If the pigeon's not coming in, something's wrong. Go and move something. You only have to move the decoys 3 or 4 yards, and then they come again. It's a case of trial and error.
This time the pigeons start to show some interest. Shooting pigeons with an air rifle requires great skill and immaculate timing. One false move before they land, they will turn tail and fly away. But leave them too long, they will realise they have been conned and fly away. So how long has Frank been shooting?
Well, I started shooting when I was at school. My father's always shot, and I've always been shooting all my life. And I shoot, well, as I say now, all the year round. I used to be a great duck shooter in the winter years ago when I was in the Kent Wildfowlers, and but now I'm too old to go out on the marsh, and so I prefer to shoot with my air rifle. This is a Swedish gun. It's an FX Cyclone, 177, 12 pounds maximum, and as quick as you do that and fire, you're shooting. It's a lovely action, back, forward, fire. 8-shot magazine, as I say, 177. I can either have it at 12 pounds for field shooting, I go to there and it's 8 pounds, or I go over to there which is 6 pounds for when I shoot in the farm buildings for clearing the feral pigeons up. The feral pigeons get in the farmers' buildings and they mess all over the tractors and the combines. But when you're down to 6 pounds, you can kill the pigeon, but you don't go through their asbestos roof with the pellet.
It's the richest prize in the gun dog world. We went to the Midland Game Fair to see who won it. Reckon your dog's a good retriever? Well, here's how one dog brought its owner a car. The Midland Game Fair gives away 2 Mitsubishi vehicles, one to the winner of the Mitsubishi Motors World Series Clay Shoot and one to the winner of the Mitsubishi Motors World Series Gun Dog Championship. Held last weekend, the final this year is between Neil Dutton with 3-year-old Sweep and Cyril Turner with 5-year-old Ben. They have reached the final by competing in heats at Countryman Fair's events throughout the summer. They each have to retrieve a certain number of launched dummies and, more difficult, they have to avoid a number of hand-thrown dummies. It's a needle match. Ben takes a little bit too much time searching for one dummy, but will it cost him the competition? It's not the only gun dog event run by show organiser Countryman Fairs. There are any number of scurries and tests. And there is the Mitsubishi Junior Gun Dog Handler final between Charlie Prime and Meg and Richard Jenkinson with Tara. Guided by their owners, the dogs each have to pick up a marked dummy on one side of the arena and 2 blind dummies on the other. Tara picks up the wrong dummy and Charlie and Meg win it. The Midland Game Fair is a magnet for dog owners and for companies interested in selling to those dog owners.
But what's so different about these, we've actually designed these to represent more closely the shape of the birds, the game birds, that ultimately these dogs are being trained to retrieve when they're out in the shooting field. So we have these two. There's the grey partridge dummy, so it's shaped like the body size and shape and feel of a partridge, and then there's the pheasant shape dummy, which is obviously shaped to that size, and it's about trying to train your dog to be confident to pick up a game bird of that particular size, as opposed to the old-fashioned dummies, which were cigar-shaped, full of sawdust, became hard and not very pleasant sometimes for the dog to actually pick and carry.
So it is Neil Dutton who's driving away with a new Mitsubishi ASX worth £20,000. Well, a very happy Mr. Dutton there with his new car. Now, top shot Michael Yardley teaches us how to hit him high at the Mornicott Estate in Devon.
We couldn't shoot without efficient shotguns and well-presented birds. But now let's go and look at the history of the shotgun, how it evolved, and of some of the birds. For example, where did the pheasant come from? How did it arrive in Britain? It's not indigenous to Britain. In fact, there are conflicting stories. Some suggest the pheasant first came to Britain by Venetian traders coming onto these shores from the area where now we have the Levant, places like Beirut. Have always been great trading areas, but that may not be the truth. Probably the most credible explanation is that Roman officers brought pheasants with them to England, both as a decoration for their gardens and also perhaps as a table bird. And we see when we look at the Middle Ages, you look at for example, the notes that exist or the records that exist of banquets that the monks had, that the pheasant was very much on the menu in the Middle Ages. The interesting thing about the pheasant in Britain is that we know it was here at the time of the Romans. We know that it was a popular table bird in the Middle Ages. But the pheasants that we see today are birds that essentially came to this country during the 18th and 19th centuries, when there was a rage for collecting all sorts of zoological specimens, and amongst other things, things like the Chinese ringneck pheasant and Japanese pheasants started to come into England. We see that there's a fashion for shooting birds on the wing. In the past, birds, and in particular partridges, had been hunted by means of hawks and also by liming and netting. But in the 18th century, we see shooting on the wing taking off as a sport amongst gentlemen. And we see the technology and the guns improving and becoming much more sophisticated. At the same time, not only are the birds changing, not only are we seeing these new breeds of pheasant coming in from the Orient, we've got tea coming over, but also we've got these new breeds of pheasant coming in from China and those sort of areas of Asia. But at the same time as this is happening, the very land itself is changing. We're going away from the old manorial system towards enclosure. And enclosure meant that the squire often got the woods. In the old days, you'd have 3 great big fields around a village. One would be left fallow, and the 2 others, which would be split into strips, would actually be farmed by everyone. Everyone together, except if you were richer, you probably had more strips. After the Enclosure Acts, we started to get fields with hedgerows and fences that look far more like the modern picture of the countryside today. Common land is enclosed. Woods often went to the major landowner of the area. So typically the squire might get a big wood, which was his now. What would he do with it? He'd put these newfangled pheasants in them and he'd preserve it. And then he could invite his friends to come and shoot. And they would shoot what became known as the battue. And battue comes from the French battre to hit, and it refers to the noise, of course, that the beaters might make. But in the early days, and I'm talking now, let's say about 1800, you'd move through the woods in line, and the beaters, the guns and the loaders would all be moving, advancing together through the woods in which these pheasants had been preserved. And a bird would be put up, the gun would take his shot, the whole line would stop, the gun would reload, the bird would be picked, and they'd move on. Well, soon, in typically English fashion, someone decided it would be much better to split the beaters and the guns into two opposing teams. So the beaters stayed in the woods and the guns were put out in a field. And as far as my early researches show, I think that they may have initially been facing away from the wood and the birds would have been driven over their heads, so everything was a going away shot. But I don't think it was very long until the guns were turned and they ended up facing the woods. Now, this again is an interesting political deal, because this style of shooting, called the batu, had been considered rather non-new. It had been considered poor form by English sportsmen and English landowners. But the thing that made the big difference was, one, that grouse shooting became more popular, and there are records of grouse being driven in the early 1800s. We certainly know that there were butts for grouse in the early 1800s. But also, with the royal marriage of Albert to Victoria, Albert brought all the continental shooting methods over with him to England. Now, he liked to shoot driven deer, driven ground game, and driven birds. Previously, British aristocrats had looked down on the continental method of shooting, and they looked down their noses at it as being rather unsporting, because French and Germans and all sorts of other people like the Elector of Hanover would have these show hunts. This was a big deal on the continent. You'd have a show hunt where 1,000 peasants might drive a vast section of country, and a team of not very expert guns would shoot everything that came their way if they could. But the idea was to be a display of wealth, and it would be for the princeling or whoever it was who put this on to show how very, very wealthy they were. And the thing really became very unethical and rather bizarre. You had, for example, deer being driven into water. You might have canvas backdrops with Arcadian scenes painted. There could be orchestras playing as the guns fired. It wasn't very English. So Albert brought this strange fashion over with him, but the English civilized it. And during the 1860s, 70s and 80s, we see driven shooting establishing itself in England in particular. But we change it. We develop very, very formal rules and etiquette for shooting, which are not just about social exclusion, though there's a little bit of that in it. They're also about safety. And by the 1880s, we see on the big estates that driven shooting has become the norm. A generation before, that wasn't the case.
Well, this has been Fieldsports Britain. We're back next week when we bring you an exclusive interview with the new Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance, Alice Barnard.